Okay, great. So, hi, everybody. Welcome to the March 2024 meeting of the PRC. First things first, we have some regrets. Irving, who I think is traveling at this point, Kyle, and I just got a note from Andrea that she can't make it. So those are our regrets for today. First item of business is the approval of the agenda. So it's been circulated. Hopefully everybody has it. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda as circulated? Matthew and a seconder. Oh, Stefan, thank you. All right. All in favor? Wonderful, thank you. And next, then we sent this out the other day, the minutes of last month's meeting. Can I have an approval of the minutes for the February 13th meeting? John, seconder. I'll take Matthew's hand again. Thank you. Right, great, super. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have some more people joining us. That's swell. All right. Great. Okay, yes. All right, everybody. All right, news and announcements. Peter isn't here yet. All right, so there's nothing to, I don't think we have an update with respect to the perspective or the perspective Alberta Police Service. We won't go there. Bill S-281, basically that's still awaiting brief, and that's in Peter's hands again. And now we move to bail reform. Howard, did you want to wait to when the students arrive?
Yes, thanks, Miles. I just got an email from Olivia. They don't, for some reason, the Zoom link isn't working. So I've copied again the one from the agenda, your agenda, and forwarded that to them. So hopefully they'll join us soon.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's stand that down if you don't mind until they join us. I know Peter is in Australia. There's Olivia. I know Peter is in Australia right now visiting his family. So that's probably why he's not here. There's Olivia now. So.
Okay, so let's go through the business arising, the parliamentary committees, and then we'll come back to this and see if we're ready to proceed with the this great final version of bill reform. All right, business arising updates on justice-related parliamentary committees. The first one is Justice and Human Rights, and that would be Howard, please.
Okay, thanks, Miles. So the Justice and Human Rights Committee, the Standing Committee, has met 3 times since our last PRC meeting. In all 3 meetings, they dealt with Bill C-332, entitled An Act to Amend the Criminal Code, round bracket, Controlling or Coercive Conduct, round bracket. This is a private member's bill introduced by Laurel Collins, who's the NDP MP from Victoria, BC. You'll recognize this bill because it is substantially similar, if not identical, to another private member's bill. In the current session, Bill C-202, introduced by Randall Garrison, and also similar, if not identical, to a private member's bill in the last Parliament, Bill C-247, also introduced by Randall Garrison. We've had discussions of this concept before, and I'll come back to that in a minute. From the summary of the bill, the point, intent, and focus of the bill is to amend the criminal code to create an offense of engaging in controlling or coercive conduct that has a significant impact on the person towards whom the conduct is directed, including a fear of violence, a decline in their physical or mental health, or of substantial adverse effect on their day-to-day activities. Now, again, this is something we've encountered before and discussed in the PRC, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Suffice it for the moment to note that on February 29th, the Standing Committee agreed that they would do clause by clause of this bill on Monday, March the 18th. So that's when we'll know whether the committee is approving with or without amendments this private member's bill. Additionally, I just wanted to note as well that on February 26th, there was a motion tabled, which was then amended, but ultimately passed by the committee. And I'll read the motion. It's that the committee called on the government to ensure that Robert Pickton spends the rest of his life in prison and prevent any re-traumatizing of families of his victims to unnecessary parole hearings. Some of you will know, I'm sure Matthew may want to jump in. Robert Pickton was the so-called pig farmer from BC who was It was a cause celeb, the investigation through his farm, the criminal proceedings, and an inquiry. He was alleged to have murdered numerous sex trade workers and basically fed their bodies to the pigs and then buried the remains in the muck and mud of his farm. The forensic activity, if you remember those scenes, went on for weeks and weeks with the police officers all over the farm. He was convicted of some number of these offenses, but nothing like the number of allegations that were brought. Picton, of course, could not have been the only cause of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in BC because the numbers are quite high, but he seems to have done more than his share. Picton has come up for day parole recently, and that's what this furor was about. You've seen the committee and parliamentarians react to the suggestion that Bernardo was moved to medium security. There's going to be some more stuff. Luke Magnotta is another notorious killer, has been moved to the same. I'm sure Rob will want to talk a little bit about that. There seems to be a trend to bring motions before committees to thoroughly denounce these things instead of letting the process, the law, do its job. In this particular case, that motion was amended twice. It had original form had called on the motion or the statement to be tabled in the House of Commons. That was deleted, so it was attenuated a bit, but there's still some of that huff and puff. So anyway, those are the two basic things that the committee looked at. Let me just go back. I'll try and be really quick. I could spend a fair bit more time on C332. It was interesting that the carriage of this idea was passed from the NDP from one member of the NDP to another. The current MP who's carrying it forward, Laurel Collins, in her remarks at second reading of the bill, indicated a little bit of her reason for taking it on. Her normal areas have to do with environmental concerns, so criminal justice is not really her area. But in her second reading comment, she recognized, the first time I recognized, I'm just paraphrasing or quoting from her second reading speech, the first time I recognized coercive control was when my sister showed up at my doorstep in tears. Her partner had taken her cell phone and bank cards. He had taken her car keys too, but luckily she had another set. It was the first time, but not definitely the last time. There was certainly violent, coercive, and controlling behavior. Luckily, MP Collins' sister was able to escape, and unlike a number of women who are caught in this endless cycle of domestic intimate partner violence, she was not. She's alive and free and well. So basically, that is her motivation for taking this on. There's a lot of support for this idea. It's come up again and again in the private members bill. There was the standing committee itself did a study of this whole issue. I'm just looking for my reference to it. Yes, in April 2021, and we discussed it at PRC and reported on it. The standing committee expressed a lot of support for this issue and the concern, but their recommendation was very muted, and I'll get to that in a second. There's no doubt that this is a red flag that often, unfortunately, leads to domestic intimate partner violence. The committee itself recommended that the Minister of Justice engage with his provincial and territorial counterparts to initiate a task force of experts with a mandate to review existing federal criminal legislation using a gender-based analysis plus and other inclusive measures, and make recommendations concerning the drafting of government legislation. So again, there are more words there. I'm not going to read it all. A lot of good words from the government on this, but even the committee's recommendation didn't actually come out and say, make the amendment. When we reviewed it as a committee in the past, my recollection, I wish Irving were here to check my recollection, but I think we just studied as the PRC, we looked at it and decided that although certainly this behavior is a red flag, indicating a high potential for intimate partner or domestic violence, criminalization of this behavior is problematic because the definition or the scope is too broad and vague to be a criminal code offense from all sorts of perspectives. One is proof, one is prosecution, but the other is the concern that it will call in a number of other kinds of behavior that may be more innocent or reasonable. The bill has a defense listed in it that attempts to accommodate for that. But I have to say, in the committee study, of course, there's a range of opinion on this particular thing, but I have to note that LEAF, the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund, in their brief, recommended against criminalizing this. And I have a lot of respect for LEAF. They do some incredible work. Emily Coyle, the executive director of EFRI, the Canadian Association of EFRI, said this: I completely understand the instinct to use the criminal law as a tool to assist in responding to harm. However, when it is the only option presented time and again as a solution, of course, women and others may feel compelled to support it. But what we are essentially saying is, please pay attention to this issue. This is not the answer. Unfortunately, the criminal law has been proven at best to be ineffective and inconsistently used, and at worst to cause irreparable harm to people who are already routinely denied their humanity and excluded from considerations of community. I'll just add that Ben Roebuck, the relatively new federal ombudsman of victims of crime, said that he supports its criminalization, but it must be accompanied by systemic change. So a lot of people are making the point that the criminal law is a blunt and ineffective tool. Things need to be done here. A lot of it has to do with support and programming and police paying attention. But the notion of criminalizing something that is not just a blunt instrument but ineffective is a real problematic issue. So anyway, this is something that the PRC, those of us who've been around for probably too long, will remember this kind of discussion, and the position we took was similar to that articulated by the executive director of EFRI, that this isn't the answer, but things need to be done. So anyway, that bill will come up. It has a fair bit of support in committee. At second reading comments, almost everyone spoke in favor of it. But again, the language is always a bit vague. The standing committee's recommendation of a task force, I'm not sure Justice Canada ever did that. Anyway, a lot of words, something needs to be done, but criminalization, PRC is our view in the past was criminalization is not the solution to this. So anyway, let me leave it at there. That was sort of what the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights has been engaging with over the last little while.
Thanks, Howard. That's terrific. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any comments or questions for Howard? Matthew.
Howard, did we ever draft a brief on that old bill?
On the original one, 247, I think it was, remember Francois Beaulieu-Manfuni did a draft on it for us, arriving at roughly this solution, and we chewed on it. But again, 2020 or 2021, so we're going back 4 years or so. The brief was left in pretty rough shape. I still have a copy. I spent a fair bit of time looking through my files. Again, I wish Miles were here. We never proceeded with it, but there was, Miles reviewed some of the case law, not Miles, Francois did some good work on this. But again, I think the fact that the Standing Committee had looked at it, for one, made our brief less than relevant. The Standing Committee heard a lot of evidence when it did its review of this back in 2021. What's the evidence before the Standing Committee for this private members bill has been quite similar. So there's a lot of content there, Matthew, but we never prepared something that got to the form where the PRC voted on the acceptance of the brief, but we seem to, it's a difficult issue to wade into, and you will see that in the testimony of everyone, including the recommendations of the Standing Committee. They fall over themselves to be very sympathetic and open to it, but very rounded words. And very few people are as blunt as Leaf or Emily Coyle saying, don't criminalize this. So anyway, I think CCJ not being known in particular for having great expertise in domestic intimate partner violence, and given our concern about criminalization, decided basically to stand down on that. But Matthew, that's a long answer for that's my recollection.
On that long answer, Howard, and addressed to the rest of the PRC minutes or committee members, I'm wondering if it is going to become advisable for Senate testimony to, in fact, resurrect that draft brief.
Perhaps my comment might address that a little bit, Matthew. I just wanted to mention there was a bill in the Senate recently, and I can't remember which one exactly, but there was several meetings on this on coercive control, and Howard, I think similar conversations were had in the Senate. So all that to say, I think this is an issue that is going to keep coming up, whether it's in a private member's bill or not. So it might not be a bad idea for us to try to take a stance or address it in some manner.
Thanks, Brendan. Rob, you your hand up earlier?
Hey, Miles. Thank you. You ready for the
Oh, okay.
CQ?
Not quite yet. Are there any other comments
Okay.
or questions for Howard or anyone else regarding the Justice Committee? Okay, thank you. Yeah, sorry. Okay, sorry, Rob. Yep, you're up.
Okay, thanks, Miles. So there were 4 meetings of CQ since our last meeting. The first one was on Bill C-26, which is an act respecting cybersecurity. Not much there for us on that, is my take. The next 2 meetings were on the growing problem of car thefts in Canada. And in those meetings, they were, discussions were mainly about how the thefts are happening, the process, how it takes place, where they're going, this type of thing, involving, and the effects of that and impacts on those in the industry, police, and those were the main witnesses. So I didn't see, I saw a passing reference to like penalties for car thefts and things of that nature in years past when changes were made and the slight impact they had then, but nothing on like new penalties that I could see. So again, not much for us on those 2 meetings. That brings me to the 4th meeting, which occurred yesterday. That one was on a request to discuss the undertaking of a study, again, on the reclassification and transfer of offenders, in this case, Luca Magnotta. Well, it was worded the transfer of Luca Magnotta and other federal offenders. So that's in a relation to the transfer of Luca Magnotta, who probably you all recall from years ago being in the news for a horrendous crime and involving dismembering of body parts, etc. So that person was transferred to from a maximum to a medium security federal prison. This meeting here yesterday was about deciding whether or how to approach a study on that. This was, in my opinion, quite a partisan meeting, and they seem to agree on to a certain extent to a certain point in the meeting, and even involved an amendment, which will seem to be agreed upon. They seem to vote on that mostly in favor, and then I thought I had it under control and well understood at that point of what they were going to do. And then there was an amendment proposed to the amendment that they had just agreed on. And then that sort of ended up in, again, it was quite turned partisan, and some of it was somewhat, I call it illogical, I guess. Anyway, I won't go on, but it was a partisan meeting down party lines, that type of thing, 6-5 votes in this. And at the end of it, it was a 2-hour meeting. I don't have the written evidence, so I was trying to listen to big blurbs of this and get the sense of what's happening. And at the end of it, when I realized they were like I didn't do the full 2 hours, I had to skip parts. And at the end, they didn't restate what they're voting on. There was some discussion before that, I know, of whether it's going to be 6 meetings or 1 future meeting and who was to be invited, which was to be the government officials on one side, and then the other side wanted to invite more. And again, they seem to agree on it, but then they seem to get some of that seemed to get undone near the end. So long way of saying, I can say they agreed to have a future meeting, at least one, on the topic of transfer of Luca Magnotta and other federal offenders. And I am almost certain, like the government officials will be invited, the Minister of Public Safety, Commissioner of Corrections, and others that in that category. And I'm not certain if the John Howard, E-Fry, and those which were talked about earlier will be part of this. So future meeting, and that's about all I can say now until I see the written record of this one, and which I probably would have next time. And probably this meeting would actually have taken place, the actual one, I believe at least one meeting that they agreed to have. So that's all I have today. If there's any questions, feel free, or anything you want me to.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, you're quite correct.
Okay.
I think they've agreed to have one meeting. Yeah, there you go, Matthew. This is your thing. Go ahead.
I am sensing that we're going into a punitive cycle in Canadian criminal justice. And I'm wondering what should be the role of CCJA. We have functioned as an educational nonprofit, and I'm wondering now with this flying in the face of Bissonnette, the Supreme Court decision, what is the role of this association?
Well, that's it. I don't have any quick answer for you, Matthew. I think that's something that we can certainly keep in mind. It's something that, if somebody wants to take the bull by the horns and do a brief, then we would certainly endorse that. But we have to wait to have somebody actually volunteer for that. Otherwise, it's pretty hard to get something before committee, I would think. Yes, Hart.
Just a suggestion, Matthew, I don't mean to point the finger at you, but this really is your area. I'm wondering if maybe a draft letter rather than a brief, because letters are more quickly to do, to the Minister of Public Safety, the Minister of Justice, and the Prime Minister, saying it's time to stop politicizing the transfer of inmates. And I mean, we now have 3 cases with the Bernardo and the Luca Magnotta, and the additional commentary in the House Standing Committee on parole eligibility of Picton. It may be time for the CCJA to write a letter to say, let the law do what it's supposed to do. Stop politicizing it and stop taking things out of context. Stop trying to frighten people with supposed horror stories. But Matthew, this is your area totally in terms of the administration of corrections and conditional release. I'm wondering if CCJA could not take a strong positional letter to the minister saying, let's let the law do its job and let's respond back by way of public education to people on this, rather than horrific. I think Rob's comment about the debates within the Public Safety Committee, and it's similar at the Standing Committee in the House, they're so political and they're just chasing their tail, falling over themselves to be seen to puff up their chests and say strong things that in fact are nonsensical. Anyway, Matthew, this I know you have a way with words, being a professor, and I know this is your area. If you were good enough to take on a draft letter, that might be a good way to get CCJ on the record on this.
Well, I'd be happy to draft up a letter, but if I would be requesting Howard permission from the committee as well as the board to make it an open letter to members of Parliament. I think just sending this to the Attorney General and the Minister of Public Safety is a mistake. This has become now a politicized national movement, and I see it as part of a cycle we're returning to this kind of analysis. I mean, historically, you know, we had a consensus up until the Harper administration. We had a consensus about criminal justice and the legislation that affected it, but that's changed. And we have down south, we have something even more serious potentially going to happen in criminal justice. So I'm happy to take on the project with the permission of the committee. I'd be happy to have a younger voice involved in the drafting with me, a younger voice on this committee. And then we would talk to our executive director. Irving almost always rewrites what I say anyway. But there you go. I'll be happy to put something together.
Thank you, Matthew. That's wonderful. We're certainly open to however you wish to proceed. I think that the process would be that it comes back to us, you know, and for a quick approval by the PRC, then to go to the board. Does that sound like a process that makes sense?
Matthew, if you want an older voice, I'd be happy to co-write it with you.
John, you're younger than I am.
Yeah, that works.
But I encourage the young members,
No, yeah.
you know,
Yeah, if somebody wants,
Brandon,
if somebody wants
Olivia,
to-
Lynn, you know, if you'd like to, just say you'd like to be part of the drafting, and this might be of interest to you, because I sense this is happening. It's part of the cycle.
Hey, Matthew, let's leave
So
it.
Matt, just a quick, sorry, Miles, we're going to be losing Olivia and Becky because their pro bono student Canada term is ending very shortly. But don't forget, Brendan is a good, strong, young voice on our committee as well.
I was just actually going to say that I'd be happy to help participate in that if I can lend a hand.
Thanks, Brendan. Very good. Okay, Matthew, we'll leave it in your able hands to coordinate all of that and get back to us, and that's great stuff. Appreciate it very much. Okay, next committee is Legal Constitutional Affairs in the Senate, and then back to Brendan.
Back to me. All right. So for legal and constitutional affairs, they've only met twice since our last meeting. They've actually been a little less busy than they were in the fall. So one of the meetings, as I mentioned last time, was to address Bill S-230, which is Kim Pate's bill to amend the Correctionals and Conditional Release Act. They proceeded to a clause by clause. Everything was accepted without any amendments made. However, there was a bit of a snag, and I apologize. Before I get to that snag, there's one thing I wanted to mention that I didn't get to when we were speaking about 230 in the last couple meetings. There was a written brief submitted, and that's probably why I missed it. It wasn't in the actual oral testimony, but there was a written brief from Tony Dube and Jane Sprott on this bill. And I think they sum up very well some of the issues with the bill. Is basically they support the spirit of trying to have a better conditional release act and putting people, giving people in being held in, I guess, what used to be administrative segregation and all that, better chances for review and all that. While they support that, they don't support the bill, essentially saying that in practice it won't change anything and it won't have the effects it's seeking. Basically, I don't want to call them objections because again, it's not objections to the bill, but their concerns is basically that CSC has a culture, it's a system, and whatever policies you put in place, they're basically able to circumvent them. They're drawing on their experience, well, particularly Tony Dube drawing on his experience reviewing the SIUs currently. One of the things that seems to be quite onerous is almost the automatic review of decisions to remain for anyone in one of the SIUs for longer than 48 hours, I believe. But essentially, there's concerns, and those concerns were brought up by many witnesses. But again, I think it was just brought home by Tony Dube and James Brott in their written brief. This brings me back to that snag I mentioned during the clause by clause. So, as I mentioned, no amendments were made to this bill. However, right before they were about to report back to Senate, a senator from Alberta, a new one, I think he's new on the committee, he mentioned that they might need a report by the parliamentary budget officer, because part of what this bill does is essentially transfers an automatic transfer of any inmates with mental health issues to a provincial mental health facility of some kind. As we all know, those facilities are few and far between. The cost of doing them, the cost of those transfers and keeping them is to be worked out. And this senator from Alberta, I think it's Tammin, I can get the name in just a moment. I'm sorry. But anyway, his concern was that that would incur significant costs. And as this is a private member bill, he had concerns that they would need to review that. Most senators actually agreed. Though I'm in support of the bill, I don't necessarily disagree that some of those costs might have been overlooked. But Senator Pate actually responded, and again, rightly so. She, I think, in the most professional way, kind of asked, like, well, why are you choosing my bill to do this when we've passed other bills that also incur costs? So yeah, she was wondering if all private bills going forward now are going to be subject to this PBO review. Because, for example, recently passed private members' bills included the expansion of electronic monitoring, which would again also incur significant costs. So anyway, 230 is not going to the report stage. They are now going to the parliamentary budget officer. But like I said, I don't know if this is the start of a trend in this committee whereby private members' bills are going to be under increased scrutiny for spending. May or may not be a good thing. Maybe a good thing, maybe a bad thing. I'm not sure, but I'll monitor that to see if that's something that keeps coming up. Whoopsie daisy. I forgot to change the name of that. The other bill that is just begun consideration, another private member's bill. It was Bill S-250, which is an act to amend the criminal code for sterilization procedures. It is sponsored by Senator Yvonne Boyer, I'm not sure if French or English, but an Ontario senator, essentially criminalizing non-consensual sterilization of women. The idea, I think we've all seen in the news recently, though it's been happening for a long time, there's been some pretty publicized cases of, I believe, some Indigenous women out in BC being sterilized without knowing that this is happening. It was just one meeting. The bill was presented. I think they want to present it as an indictable offense with a maximum of up to 14 years in prison for, like I said, non-consensual sterilization. I did a bit of reading ahead, and one thing I just want to flag to the PRC is that there was a written brief submitted by the Native Women's Association of Canada. I imagine they'll be presenting orally as well, but they're advocating for an amendment to instead of speaking about non-consensual, rather, instead of speaking about informed consent sterilization, they want to change the wording to informed choice, which I'm not sure if that's defined legally. I'll leave that to the lawyers here to say if it is or not. Essentially, their assertion is that this is a wider definition than simply informed consent. One of the things that gives me pause a little bit is that one aspect that they say differentiates informed choice from informed consent is that informed choice is done in a non-urgent manner. And my concern is that perhaps where a sterilization may sometimes be necessary is if a medical procedure gone wrong and something might happen. I don't know if it would meet the non-urgent criteria. So I'm obviously not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, but that is something that sort of raised some question marks in my head, and I imagine it might be something that comes up later on, but I just wanted to flag that. And other than that, there's no further meetings planned for the moment, and that's it.
Thanks, Brendan. That's great. Any questions or comments for Brendan? Okay, let's move on. Our last committee. So it's the Senate Human Rights Committee. So that would be Dick.
The Senate Human Rights Committee had its first meeting on February 12th since their last meeting in December. And the topic was a new topic for them. It was the government response to the Human Rights Committee's report from 2021 entitled Human Rights of Federally Sentenced Prisoners. There were 4 representatives representing the government from Correctional Services Canada and Public Safety Canada. They got into some very specific issues. I think it's fair to say that a theme of the comments from the committee was that the response of the government to the report was very general and did not adequately respond to the committee's recommendations. Some of the issues discussed included strip searches, classification of prisoners, specifically the number of women classified as high risk, failure to respect Muslim practices regarding diet and worshiping practices. Other witnesses at the meeting, there were 2, John Howard Society of Canada and the Associate Executive Director of the Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies. And they were both very critical of the government response. Just to give you a few highlights, from John Howard, it was stated there's a vague agreement in this government response to all of the recommendations, but no commitment as to when they might ever be implemented. She highlighted abuse of solitary confinement as continuing. An absolute mental health crisis continues to exist in prisons. The inmates' complaint process is totally dysfunctional, and access to legal counsel is too restricted. From the Elizabeth Fry Societies Association, it was stated that the government response does not represent the realities in penitentiaries where human and legal rights violations continue to be rampant. Some of the points raised here were penitentiaries are filled with people who don't need to be incarcerated. They are there via poverty, mental health, discrimination, and addiction. Few programs adequately prepare people to be employed in the community. And lastly, the programs listed in the government's response to the report reach but a small handful of the total incarcerated population. Yet every incarcerated person is subject to incredibly expensive and barrier-laden processes to maintain contact with their families. Programming is not the needed systemic solution. Affordable phone rates, accessible visits, and decarceration are. And that was about it. The next meeting is mid-March.
Thanks, Dick. Very good. Any questions or comments for Dick on that? All right, thank you everybody for the parliamentary committees, much appreciated. So let's go back now to the final version of the draft brief on bail reform. So Howard and your cohorts. Yeah, you're. There you go.
My apologies. We've lost Becky. She had an urgent matter to attend to, so unfortunately she had to leave, but we still have Olivia with us. Let me just say a couple of things very quickly. One of which is we wanted to thank both Irving and John Winterdyke. Sorry, John, I'm stumbling over your last name there. Both Irving and John Winterdyke for their thoughtful comments on the brief. Irving had a chance to give me some comments before we first tabled the brief prior to last meeting, and we made a number of changes in response to his. John gave us a very thoughtful review of the historical, theoretical, criminological perspective and lens on this, and we thank them both. In this version, the final version, there are 2 changes since the version you saw a month ago. I'm going to speak to one, and then I'm going to ask Olivia to speak to the other one. The first change you will notice is a footnote on page 1 of the brief referring to the CCLA's recently released report called Still Failing, the Deepening Crisis of Bail and Pretrial Detention in Canada. This report is a bit of a showstopper. When I first saw it, I was a bit alarmed in the sense that I thought maybe it made the CCJ brief far less relevant than it was. Of course, we had no idea that this was coming. And when I look at the report itself, which is awesome, I commend it to all of your attention. In terms of our brief, we had myself, Olivia, and Becky toiling away on this for a number of months. The CCLA had at least 10 pro bono Canada law students and students from 2 law firms and articling students and staff lawyers at CCLA. So I say this a little bit defensively. Their report is awesome. It is massive. It is original research, including data predicated upon actual observant participation in bail hearings. I commend it to everyone. Having had a look at it, I still think the CCJ brief is worth doing. Our approach is a little bit different, but certainly our approach keeps within the bounds of the CCJ normal approach, the view on past legislation, case law, where to go in the future, and evidence-based. So I think our brief is still worth doing, but that's something for this committee and ultimately the board to decide. At any rate, Becky and Olivia have done a phenomenal job on this. The second change we made in this latest version, and I hope the final draft of this brief, is that we had comments both from John and from Irving about the comparative law version, that we had included only 2 countries, and there was a good reason for that. Olivia, why don't you sort of explain what we've done and why?
Yeah, no problem. So John had pointed out specifically there was no reference to the UK's bail system. We had done extensive research into the UK's bail system. The unfortunate circumstance was mostly for time or page length. A lot of the UK has a different bail system in England and Wales, and then in Scotland, and then in Ireland. And they're really niche differences that I think do make quite a difference. So instead of delving too much into the UK's bail system, you'll see near the bottom of page 7, we've added another subheading under comparative international analysis called Other Countries to Consider, where we outline that the United Kingdom is a reasonable comparison to Canada. However, because of the way they operate their system, it's like outside the scope of the brief. And then we've included a footnote with 3 sources that reference the UK bail system, the differences in the Scottish bail system, and the differences in the Irish bail system. And that's sort of how we try to address that.
So Irving had also said to me early on, why just 2 countries? And of course, we are limited by time and attention and effort. Olivia had carefully chosen the 2 illustrative countries, Australia quite similar to our current debate, whereas Finland I'm sorry, Finland, have I got that right?
Norway.
Olivia? Norway, sorry. My apologies to the Norwegians on the committee and everyone. But Norway was quite a different approach. So they nicely bookended the discussion, but there's some links for anyone who wants to follow the UK system. The Irish, the Scottish, and English, usually England and Wales are combined, but bail, of course, is administered locally. So local changes can make a big difference, but there's enough there for people to pursue. There's just a limit to what we could do in a brief we wanted to keep not longer than 8 pages. At any rate, Olivia and Becky have done some really fabulous work on this over months. I was a little concerned that the CCLA report had made our brief kind of redundant. I don't think that's true, although that is up to you to judge. I think the recommendations in our report are well worth making. I think it's a good overview, evidence-based policy perspective. But again, Olivia and Becky, and I know Becky's been working on this for over a year in various ways, but Olivia and Becky have done tremendous work, and we are very, very lucky to have their participation, and I hope they will consider joining CCJ at some point in the future, but certainly connecting with us. So anyway, let me leave it at that. Back to you, Miles. That's all I want to say on that.
Matthew has his hand up.
I think at this juncture, not only is a commendation applicable to Olivia, her colleague, and Howard on this well-written brief, but I think it's now time for the Policy Review Committee to send this to the board for approval.
It is actually, that's the next step. And again, I want to thank Howard and Olivia, Becky, and I want to thank John for his insights. So a terrific brief. And then I wholeheartedly agree with Matthew. So put a motion to the PRC to approve the final brief for submission to the board. All those in favor?
Miles, could I interrupt for a second?
Absolutely, Dick.
As you know, I was away last month, and I have not seen this brief, and I haven't seen the CCLA brief. I would be interested. I'm very interested in bail, so I would like to see it. I don't want to hold up everything, but not knowing what's in it, it's a little hard to comment on it. I do have a general question, keeping in mind I haven't seen it. Does the brief use the Canadian comparison of the Youth Criminal Justice Act on bail? The reason I raise that is because the amendments to the Youth Criminal Justice Act have resulted in a very dramatic reduction in the number of young people locked up in detention. And in compared to the adult system, it's just a dramatic difference. And it seems to me that, I mean, Howard can, or Olivia can tell me, but it seems like that's something that maybe should be considered. It's right in our own country, and we have the evidence over 20 years of research on this to show that the model used in the Youth Criminal Justice Act on bail is much more effective than the criminal code system. So, summing that up, I'd like to see a copy of it if that's possible.
Certainly. Howard?
Yes, Dick, you should have two copies of it. One from last month, Miles sent out, and the most recent.
I didn't get it. I also didn't get the agenda for today, so maybe there's some mix-up.
I will send it to you after we close down the meeting, so you have it. There's a PDF version of it. But the quick answer to your question is yes. We very much considered that, but not enough, Dick. I had said at the last meeting that I was sad that you weren't there because of your experience on YCJA. We have a recommendation in the brief. It's recommendation 5, that consideration be given to adopting some of the provisions in the YCJA. I note myself, and it was part of the discussions Olivia and Becky and I had, that of course the remand population in the adult system has been going up, both in terms of ratio or percentage, but also in terms of numbers. The same thing happened with the YCJA, which initially brought down sentenced offenders, but not remand offenders. But after the amendments you've spoken to, the YCJA was capable of bringing that back down. Dick, I referenced on more than one occasion David Cole, retired Justice David Cole's view that the real problem with the adult system is it is not more like the youth justice system. I would like to see this brief go on to the board for approval, so I thank Matthew for his thoughts, but I would be quite happy to send the brief directly to Dick and let Dick have a week or two to look at it and get back to me. If we could strengthen the parts of the brief without adding a lot of length, particularly recommendation 5, we referenced 2 provisions, but I'm not sure we had the most important ones. I would be happy to send it to Dick, get Dick's comments back and incorporate that or have a conversation with him. We're going to lose Olivia and Becky, I think, by the time of our next PRC meeting. The Pro Bono Student Canada term ends, and they're both going to be busy with term papers, final exams, and starting articling and writing the bar admission. So it's Olivia and Becky are sort of at the top of the law school ladder, but then they drop back down to the endless upward ladder of bar admission and all sorts of things. So I think we can thank them for their tremendous work, their spirit, and their heart. But Dick, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you about that. I'd very much welcome your input. Olivia, are you okay with that?
100%. I think the provision 5 is one that we really stand by. And if we can strengthen it, then I am totally open to that. I'm also open to engaging in further communication about it past the Pro Bono Student Canada deadline, just to see this through. I would love the opportunity to make sure that I'm kind of involved until it's sort of sent off. So I'm happy to do extra work in April if needed.
Yes, Matthew.
Maybe I can amend the motion to send this to the board. And that it would be a presumption that the brief minus some minor revisions is ready to be sent to the board. This would allow Richard a little bit of time to actually read the piece and maybe bolster some of the recommendations. I think, though, that we need to go forward.
I think, to be fair, and get Dick's input is valuable to us. I think we should basically put a process in place where this works rather expeditiously. So we'll leave it to Howard and Dick to work back and forth with Olivia and Becky if they can. Whatever further amendments are made, then Howard can then send that to me. I will circulate it to the PRC for their approval once more, and on that basis, then forward it to the board. So hopefully to expedite the process.
So Matthew, I mean, I understand totally, and I think if Irving were here, he would have the same concern. We want to see this good work capitalized, but Dick is an expert, not just in bail, but also in the youth justice system, having been one of its creators, if I can put it that way. So the opportunity, I think it'd be a shame to miss the opportunity to get Dick's input. But I'll send it to Dick. Dick, if you can get back to me, I'll connect with Olivia and Becky. We'll talk about any changes. If they're not significant, then I'll get back to Miles, let him know that, and maybe the brief could be sent off to the board. But I'd love to give Dick this chance to sort of have a bit of input, and even if it waits till the next meeting of the PRC, I'm okay to stay with that. I think Olivia and Becky are strong enough to help us with that as we continue. But if I don't know if that's too many words for a motion, but Miles, does that make sense?
It does. Let's work on an ad hoc basis, moving it forward, and everybody will be kept in the loop. And then sooner rather than later, we'll get it in front of the board where it belongs, and we'll take it from there.
I guess we have to add Dick to your email PRC list, I think.
Yeah, he is,
Miles.
but that's okay. We'll work that out.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Everybody, I appreciate it. Okay, so that is it. So let's move then back to the Business Horizon, or news updates. Business Horizon. Okay, so the next item is again, it's a waiting brief. It's the alternatives to incarceration. Matthew and Kyle are working on that. So I presume, Matthew, you don't have anything yet to bring to us. No. Okay, that's a no. Okay, thanks, Matthew. Appreciate it. On the next issue, subsub D, I'm sorry, this relates to the proposal we have with respect to essentially criminal convictions being grounds for discrimination with respect to employment and potentially housing. Thank you to Howard and Irving for sending along a post by the National Associations Active in Criminal Justice, the NAACJ. Which has provided pretty much a jurisdiction by jurisdiction breakdown on how each province and territory approaches the issue of discrimination when it comes to employment based on criminal convictions, and is there for those who are subject to that, and what they can possibly do when that takes place, and the resources they have, whether it's to John Howard or what have you, who will assist in that regard. So I've included a link to that material provided in the agenda, so everybody has it there. It's quite accessible and easy to read. So again, thank you to Howard and Irving for sending that along. Did you want to add anything to that, Howard? No?
Nope. It was quite interesting to see jurisdiction by jurisdiction, and I thought it might help as you approach the Uniform Law Conference, Miles, with your proposal. So, but anyway, no, I think that covers it completely.
Yeah, absolutely. When they get back to us, which I expect now to be in the 3 to 4 month range from now, which is when they take it to the board, we'll certainly be talking to our contacts, and I'll certainly mention this. I'm sure they've seen it, and so they'll be very aware of it. But that's fine, and hopefully we can do something about it. So anyway, we're on track, and I appreciate that. Okay, everybody, so that takes us then to bills under consideration. There hasn't been a lot of parliamentary activity. I tend to think that the only thing we need to pay attention to a great degree are those bills that receive assent and those bills that are introduced. So as far as government bills are concerned, Bill C-62 received royal assent on February 29th. That is the bill dealing with medical assistance in dying. All right, so everybody's probably pretty familiar with that and how it has come about. What else can I tell you? Bill C-320 to amend the Corrections and Correctional Release Act with respect to information provided to victims regarding eligibility dates. That is now basically had third reading and is in the Senate with first reading. And Bill C-321 to amend the Criminal Code to consider the fact that victims of an assault, if they're healthcare first responders, are going to be aggravating circumstances in sentencing. Likewise, that's had third reading and now it's had first reading in the Senate on February 29th. All right, Senate, there are no new government bills, and I do not believe that there are no new private member bills as well. So that takes us to the end, unless anybody has any comments on any parliamentary. Yes, Howard.
Just a quick thing. I've pasted into the chat. I hope you can all see it. A website link to something that has just been posted today. It's the latest annual report of the Structured Intervention Unit Advisory Panel. So this is the group that Tony Doob sits on. Jane Sprott is also on it. There was a reference in both Rob's report and Brendan's report. This is brand new off the press. It's the 2022-23. Like all things, there's a time lag, but this is the latest report of the independent advisory panel to review the implementation of the Structured Intervention Unit. And it all connects quite closely with the testimony that Tony and Jane gave to the Senate committee on Kim Pate's bill. So have a look at that. I'm going to put it in the newsletter this coming week as well, but it's something, it's hot off the press. I haven't had a chance to look at it myself, but I think it's fairly critical, as Tony's testimony was, of the administration of Correctional Service of Canada. So.
Wonderful. It's there. Thank you, Howard. Appreciate that. Anything else for the good of the committee? All right, everybody. The next meeting is April the 9th. Hopefully we see you all there. And thank you very much for your attendance. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.